Hey guys, Shadarek here, and today's video is going to be a Fel-Scarred raid guide for the no mover single target build. Now this is typically only run on a few bosses in the raid, namely Plexus Sentinel, Lumathar, and Fractalus. Possibly can also be ran on Dimensius as well. I haven't gotten there quite yet, but those would be the only applicable bosses. Now, for the build that I'm talking about, I am talking about the no mover iteration, the one that doesn't take extra G or inertia, no initiative, no tactical retreat. There's another one bouncing around that drops Looks Can Kill and Chaotic Transformation, as well as Relentless Onslaught, and in turn runs these 3 talent points. And we have a mix of both depending on the fight. If you come in and look at Plexus Sentinel, most people are running Fel-Scarred, and the majority are not running this Exergy versus Inertia variant. They're running the regular. And then we also have Fractalus. Same thing, most people aren't running it, but notably, there is ones that are close to the top. These builds are very similar in performance, and Hawk has always been a bit of a freak with his Inertia. But these are the talents that you run. Importantly, if you take a close look, you actually have all of the Immolation Aura AoE talents. Now, you do not have automatic thrown glaives, so Burning Wound outside of pure single target would be something that you have to maintain, but typically this is only run in pure single target due to isolated prey. As soon as you add additional targets, the damage dealt by this build drops pretty significantly on the main target, so you lose a lot of single target, whereas with Eldrachi, as soon as you're adding targets, it gains, so usually Eldrachi pulls ahead in situations where isolated prey turns off. With all that, you still have Flamebound as well for the 10-yard Immolation Aura range, and Immolation Aura does a significant portion of your damage. But I'll get into the rotation and damage breakdowns next. Also notable with this, you don't run Shattered Destiny. Now, the reason for this is because Fel-Scarred doesn't play too nice with extending Metamorphosis. You need it to drop between your I-Beam windows, or else you do not gain the ability to reproc Demon Surges, and your 4-piece will not proc. So, up next we have Gearing. Now, for gear, you're typically going to be doing the same, where you stack Critical Strike and Mastery with a bit of haste, and Versatility is your last stat. You do want some amount of haste, and with this, it's going to be the usual of follow your sims. While there is Abyss List, I want to note, as I always do, Abyss Lists are bad. Abyss List only works if you have every single piece of that same list, because all you're doing is meeting a set amount of stat ratios. So if you change a single piece, it can wildly change what you want in other slots. For example, if you don't have Salhadar's Folly, you're going to need that mastery made up in other slots, which means you're not going to want a ring like a Devout Zealot's ring. So, always have to sim your character and keep up to date with sims, but typically, your off-piece, if you're going to wear one, is going to be legs. But depending on requirements for haste, using all 5 tier pieces can be pretty good for Fel-Scarred Havoc. For true Bis pieces, obviously, Cloak, Breshy Wraps, there's nothing to replace that with. For the belt, up until about 17 item level, at the time of making this video, you would not replace your disc belt. However, in the 11.2.5 patch, that will be getting nerfed, and after that, you'll just have to follow sims, but typically, it's about closer to a 7-10 belt. That will outdo the disc belt. Now, the boots from Soul Hunters are permanent Bis. Even if you have, say, Mythic boots versus a pair of normal Interloper's Reinforced Sandals, you run the Interloper Sandals. The increased proc effect on the Reshi Wraps is too powerful to give up, and it's just free as the boots still have full stat amounts. And then from there, it's really stacking Critical Strike and Mastery, which Logic Gate Alpha and Salhadar's Folly do a lot of, and then a little bit of haste coming from the Devout Zealot's Ring, which is your other Bis, but these can be replaced or mix and matched with crafted pieces, however you need to get the stats. For Trinkets, it depends a little bit. Astral Antenna is always good, so that's always a great trinket option. And then because you're typically playing Fel-Scarred on pure single target, that usually means Screams of a Forgotten Sky is your best, as long as we're talking something like Plexus Sentinel, possibly Lumathar. Fractalus may even be a little on the short side, but if you're playing Fel-Scarred in any situation with a bit more AoE, or with damage burn windows, then you're going to have increased value on Eras's Ritual Forge. This calls into play thinking about Dimensius. For Dimensius, you have a lot of forced downtime, which allows your 2 minutes to come back up. Fel-Scarred deals a lot of burst damage on their 2 minutes, and it allows you to have this powerful unused trinket entering phase 3 to do a large amount of burst damage in his 200% damage burn with Bloodlust. This does depend exactly where Bloodlust is getting used at the time. I'm not sure if there will be any strat changes on Dimensius for Mythic, but typically I think it's going to be getting used on that damage burn for that phase 3 phase to cut down on that. So Eras's Ritual Forge is of higher value there, but outside of that, it's really just following your sims. Now, I'm going to have a separate video that discusses which bosses and why I think you should play certain builds on them. I will make a note that I have swapped to playing Fel-Scarred on Soul Hunters. However, I only recommend doing so if you're playing the Mythic Plus build. This ended up being actually a pretty poor pull considering what I had done in previous pulls, but the build that you're playing for this is not that no-mover build. It's the Mythic Plus build with Initiative and with Throwglaive talents, just so you have Burning Wound up on all 3 targets permanently without constantly target swapping, and no weird issues there. Mostly just good because the constant 3 target plus the extra Immolation Aura range feels really good on the fight. Now, with both gearing as well as talents out of the way, let's take a look at rotation. Starting with the opener. So, for the opener for Fel-Scarred, this one's a little bit lengthy, but honestly pretty simple compared to a traditional Havoc opener. Not too much is changing. There is just a little bit around Essence Break, but I'll get there in just a moment. So, pulling it up on Wowhead here and looking at, the raids card. The raid Fel-Scarred single target build. We have, before pull, you're going to cast Immolation Aura just before pull. You are not going to do a sigil. Now, Sims do an Immolation Aura and a sigil. However, it does these at 0 seconds as like some pre-pull batching. So, in actual play, in my opinion, I think it's better to not use the Sigil of Flame pre-pull. Just do the Immolation Aura into Hunt on pull, and you should be good to go. You're going to slam your unused Trinkets as well as your Fleeting Tempered Potion at that same time as you're casting Hunt, and then you're going to spam all of your Immolation Auras out before going into I-Beam. When you I-Beam, you're going to want to watch for and move to pick up your Demon Soul while you start casting Annihilation into Death Sweep. This will get rid of, or not get rid of, but this will make use of both of your Demon Surges granted by I-Beam, as well as your Inner Demon, which is a talent that I'll show in just 1 second here. And Inner Demon's given by any I-Beam and metacasts. Then you cast Metamorphosis. Due to being Fel-Scarred, Metamorphosis will reset all charges of Immolation Aura, Sigil of Flame, which isn't on cooldown here, but can be, it resets the cooldown on that, Death Sweep, because we are running Chaotic Transformation still, and I-Beam. With that pressed, you're then going to use Consuming Fire, which is your upgraded Immolation Aura, and if it procs any resets, you'll keep using the resets until you are down to 1 charge and no longer overcapped. Then you'll cast Annihilation, and the reason for that is, as I mentioned, Inner Demon, because if you do not use this Inner Demon from casting meta, it will be lost. And after Annihilation, you press Abyssal Gaze. This means 3 of your 5 Demon Surges are now dealt with, leaving just 2 of them not done, which is Death Sweep and Sigil of Doom. From here, you're going to press Essence Break, and then only cast Annihilation until your Consuming Fire buff drops. Now, the reasoning for this is that with the tier set giving 20% bonus damage to Chaos Strike, during the tier set plus your Demon Soul window, Annihilation does more damage than Death Sweep. So you simply do not press Death Sweep outside of scenarios that you need to proc the Demon Surge, meaning in meta, while you have Consuming Fire up and Demon Soul, you just will not cast Death Sweep. You only cast Annihilation. But as soon as that buff drops, you're going to cast Death Sweep and Sigil of Doom. I do need to change the ordering on these, however, Sims do it this way. I don't understand why Sims do it this way, but just as a note, they do. but you cast Death Sweep, Sigil of Doom, and Consuming Fire again, and then you'll carry on spamming Annihilations until Consuming Fire drops again. Now, I do want to show that opener before I move on to the general rotation. So, what the opener looks like, as I mentioned, is before pull, you're going to be pressing Immolation Aura, and then you're just hunting in with your Trinket and Pot usage, spamming out all your Immolation Auras if you get any procs. Look for your Demon Soul and pick it up while you do Annihilation Death Sweep. Press Consuming Fire until you're down to 1 charge, press an Annihilation into Abyssal Gaze, Essence Break, and spam Annihilation until Consuming Fire drops. When that falls off, I'm then going to press Death Sweep and Sigil, and then I will Consuming Fire again, and keep spamming Annihilation until Consuming Fire drops again, at which time I will finally use another Death Sweep. And then, as meta drops here, I'm going to press my Consuming Fire as it does bonus damage, and depending on whether or not you have pre-stacked, which you should pre-stack Cycle, is when that I-Beam comes up. However, you do not use that I-Beam until Metamorphosis drops. Now, the reason for that is if you press I-Beam before Metamorphosis drops, you will not trigger your 4-piece, which, as you see here, entering Demon form now immediately induces a Demon Surge, and shatters the Demon Soul Fragment, granting the 20% damage for 10 seconds. So if you do not wait for meta to drop and press a regular I-Beam, you will not get this Demon Surge and the 20% damage Demon Soul, and additionally, you will not re-enter Metamorphosis, which will not give you your 2 Demon Surges on Annihilation and Death Sweep, as they will when I push them here, and you see them start glowing. And when I press them, that's going to do my Demon Surges as well as my Demon Soul is dropped. So you have to wait for meta to fall before you press that second Abyssal Gaze, and it's just in cases where you have Cycle pre-stacked that you need to watch for that. If you don't have it pre-stacked, then it's going to come up after meta ends. However, later in the fight, it's the same thing. When you are into your future Metamorphosis windows and you are redoing that opener on your 2-minute timers, you need to wait for meta to fall before you I-Beam again. I did also want to take a second to show some tips regarding picking up your Demon Soul from your 4-piece. So with your Demon Soul, it will always shoot the exact same distance away from your character at the time that it fires. Now, the size of this is actually very similar to the inner ring of a sigil. So, it will always be on the outer part of the very green portion of this ring, and that will be where those souls do drop. So if I I-Beam again, another one's going to drop, and it's going to be at a similar point. This one's also going to expire in a second, as these souls last on the ground for 30 seconds. That being said, the thing that you're looking for is where it spawns, keeping in mind that it's going to be in a small ring around your character and a consistent ring around your character. Now, to pick these up, they're not like regular Demon Souls, unfortunately, or not like regular souls, unfortunately. You have to get very close to them. What that means is, what makes it easiest is going to be watching for the direction that it fires, because it's as simple as, once it does fire, you take a step in the direction, and you'll get your soul instantly. So when you're I-beaming, you want to look for where it goes, and then take a step towards it. That said, if you're playing in a place where you can have a wall next to you, that also means that you can guarantee that there's a direction that it's not going to go. And this does 2 different things. The first thing is, it's going to be a lot easier to pick up if it does shoot forward. The second thing is, if it tries to go backwards, it will fire on your character. As you can see, it's directly under my character. When I move, I'm going to pick it up. Same thing when I press meta. It shoots out in front of me. I take a small step forward. I get my soul. Now, I do need meta to fall before I can press I-Beam again. As I mentioned, pressing in Abyssal Gaze while you're in I-Beam does not gain access to your Demon Surges or proc a Demon Soul. Now, again, the upside is, if it does also spawn directly behind you when you I-Beam, then you're also able to just kind of be moving an I-Beam and pick it up during it. And this is really just something you can do if you are standing on some sort of terrain that does block it. Now, I did mention that the distance it fires from your character is when that Demon Surge does proc, which is about halfway through I-Beam. So again, I Vengeful and I-Beam, it's going to shoot out from where my Demon Surge procced, and now it's all the way over there. So if you're actively moving or hitting Vengeful while doing an I-Beam, you're going to have the problem of, where the hell did my soul go? Because that's not anywhere near me, but that's why. It's because of the movement. And the same thing will happen if you're doing like a double jump and then you I-beam. It's now able to fire out a little further than normal, and taking a step that way won't pick it up because it actually fired while I was in the air. And you can see that means I was about where my cursor was here when it fired, and if I walk over to that point, I then need to take one step towards it to pick it up. That's about everything I have in regards to picking up your Demon Soul. While this is something that should be very simple, in raid fights and sometimes in Mythic Plus, it can be very hard to see these things, and this is one of the largest issues that I do see when I am watching Fel-Scarred footage of other Demon Hunters, is not playing around the Demon Soul enough and not caring enough about it, causing them to either miss souls entirely or just pick them up at the wrong time so it's not overlapping their Immolation Aura and their damage. It's a 20% damage amp. It is absolutely massive and pretty much one of the only big things to min-max on the spec right now. With that opener out of the way, next we have the general rotation for the single target build. So, let's get right into that. Now, with this, I will mention, this looks like a lot. Right out the gate, this looks like there's a lot going on with the priority list and a lot of words here. But, just to break down a basic version of what this means before I get into the specifics, is, essentially, your goal for the spec outside of those meta windows is to have an Immolation Aura up for every I-beam, press Immo Aura before I-beam, which is covered here. When you I-beam, you're going to be picking up your Demon Soul, and then you're just going to be using Essence Break if it's up, and spamming Annihilation, and then using Death Sweep as your last global. If Essence Break isn't up, you'll just spam Annihilation, and then use Death Sweep as your last global. Outside of those I-beam windows, if Hunt comes up, you just press on cooldown. It doesn't do anything special. If you're in meta, Death Sweep is used if you don't have Immolation Aura up and a Demon Soul. And if I-beam's on cooldown, Metamorphosis gets pressed. That sets you back up into that kind of opener combo. Now, from there, it's just going to be, if you're not in I-beam and I-beam's not up, Blade Dance is a higher priority than Chaos Strike. Again, unless you have Immolation Aura and Demon Soul active. This can happen for a couple GCDs after Demonic ends, but it's not that often. And you can Fel Blade if you're under 80 Fury. From there, you're just pressing Annihilation or Chaos Strike. You can Immolation Aura if you're out of buttons. However, I would note on this that you don't necessarily want to press Immolation Aura unless it's going to overlap your next I-beam window. So it's actually going to be better to press your Sigil of Flame here, unless you're entirely out of options, and make sure you have an Immolation Aura up for your next I-beam. However, the Fury generation on this build feels very good, and you don't really feel like you typically run out. And then, if you're entirely out of buttons, you can just throw Glaive. Also an option if you're at ranged. You could just throw Glaive or Fel Rush. Because this isn't a mover build, there's no Vengeful or Fel Rush usage anywhere outside of just if you're entirely out of buttons, and Vengeful could be used purely for movement. You don't press it with anything, you don't need to deal with it. Now, the reason that this looks so complex is that the rules cause a little bit of convoluted gameplay. The main thing that you would have to learn is when to not press Death Sweep, and actually properly holding Immolation Aura for I-beam windows, and just maximizing Immolation Aura in general for your 2-piece, which is what gives you that 20% increased damage to Chaos Strike. So when I press Immolation Aura, I gain this buff here, Chaos Strike damage is increased by 20%. So basically, to go down the list and say what all of this means is, the first line just tells you that if you're going to be leaving meta, but Death Sweep hasn't been pressed and you still have a Demon Surge, that's your highest priority, is you need to press Death Sweep and get that Demon Surge out. Now, you don't have to do this as your final global. This is something I wouldn't really recommend playing around, even though Sims do it. It's about a 0.3% or 20k DPS loss to not play around this, and to just make sure that you get a Death Sweep in every demonic window for that Demon Surge. So I'd recommend doing that unless you're very good about your gameplay and can play GCD perfect. Afterwards, if you're in an Essence Break window, just cast Annihilation. If Essence Break comes up while you're in Metamorphosis, or you go enter Metamorphosis while Essence Break is up, you'll press Essence Break. And then next is Annihilation and Chaos Strike are pressed over every other button while Immolation Aura and Demon Soul are active. Again, Demon Soul is for 10 seconds after every I-Beam, but you do have to physically go pick it up, and another 10 seconds after meta. These do add together, they don't overwrite. So around your meta window, you do get 20 seconds of it, which feels very good. It says 20 seconds on the tooltip here, which isn't correct, the actual one in-game. As you can see here, when I press an I-Beam and then gain the buff, and you'll see it show up on my buff bar, it's going to be for 10 seconds, and then when I press meta and shoot out another one and pick it up, it's now at 16, because it just adds 10. The next two lines are involving Immolation Aura, and all it is if you're capped at 2 charges, inside or outside of meta, whether it's Immolation Aura or Consuming Fire, you press the button, because you don't want to be capped at 2 charges. The next line is, if you don't currently have an Immolation Aura active, and I-Beam is coming up, i.e. I-Beam is going to be pressed within 3 seconds, then you want to cast Immolation Aura. This is going to give you the damage amp for the entire I-Beam window, and then you don't really have to worry about it. The one note I'll have is, if you're near the end of Metamorphosis, say you have 5 seconds left on Metamorphosis, and then I-Beam comes up in 3 seconds, you won't be pressing that I-Beam until after meta falls. So don't press it until about 3 seconds before that meta would fall, and it can be 3 seconds or later. As long as it's pressed before I-Beam, you're good to go. The next highest priority is just pressing the Hunt on cooldown. Again, no special interaction. Death Sweep, if you're in meta and you don't have these buffs, then it's going to be better than Annihilation, but not by much. The next line just covers Metamorphosing if you've already put I-Beam on cooldown. And I will note, you never want to press Metamorphosis if you have not spent all your I-Beam, all of your Immolation Aura charges as well as I-Beam, because it will reset, and you do want to save for that window so you can do the I-Beam meta combo and get double Demon Souls for that 20-second window. The next line is just using I-Beam, pretty much used on cooldown outside of meta. Blade Dance, if it's up, is used over Chaos Strike and Annihilation without the Immolation Aura and Demon Soul buffs. If you go under AD Fury and you're outside of meta, then you can Fell Blade as a higher priority than Chaos Strike. Now, down at the bottom is just, this is if you're entirely running out of Fury, which is honestly incredibly rare on the spec that you feel Fury starved as long as you're staying in melee, but you can cast Sigil of Flame for Fury generation or Immolation Aura. However, ideally you do want to make this override your next I-Beam window, so be a bit careful about this if it does happen, and just make sure you're treating this as a very low priority outside of pressing it for those I-Beam windows. Another thing to keep in mind is with this build, you do have Blind Fury, so whenever you cast I-Beam, you're going to generate like 100 Fury or so, and you're just not going to have any Fury problems around those times. As well as that, Fel-Scarred has increased Fury generation on Demon Blades during meta, so during meta, you typically do not feel any Fury starvation issues. Now, I'm going to put in some clips to show exactly what I'm talking about in regards to the regular rotation, but essentially, once meta falls, it is as simple as you're pressing Chaos Strike, and if you don't have Immolation Aura and Demon Soul buff up, then you Blade Dance as well. Making sure you're pressing your buttons on cooldown, but there is not much going on for this build. So for this guide, I've decided that I'm going to go over this Plexus Sentinel VOD that I have to show what the opener as well as some of the general rotation does look like. So, first, let's start with the opener. Now, right out of the way on the opener, I'm going to open with Immolation Aura and then go into hunting the boss. I do press this Immolation Aura probably a second early, and then I go into my hunt, spam out my Immolation Auras before I I-Beam, look where my Demon Soul drops, and I step to the side to grab it while I Death Sweep and Annihilation. At this point here is when I then, after picking up my Demon Soul, which you'll be able to see right here, spend those 2 buttons and I meta. When I meta now, I'm going to be looking to pressing Consuming Fire. And I don't get any resets here, but if I did get a reset, I'd press this until I'm down to 1 charge. And then after that, I'm going to be pressing Annihilation to use my Inner Demon, which is the glide buff here. Let me hit play, and I press that into my Abyssal Gaze. After Abyssal Gaze is Essence Break and just spamming Chaos Strike. Then I do have to leave to go place this trap. And after my Consuming Fire drops, which is here right as I come back in, When Consuming Fire drops, my next globals are then going to be Death Sweep and Sigil of Doom. This is to use my Demon Surges. My Demon Surge buff stacks have not fallen at this point, so this is the ideal time to use those. And then you'll press another Consuming Fire right after, and carry on with spamming Annihilation until these buffs drop. From there, it's going to be more of the regular rotation, but let me skip ahead a bit further in the fight to a point where we're not going to have as much downtime around this window. Alright, so I'm going to show it from the end of my next Metamorphosis window, as this covers something else that I wanted to discuss regarding the regular rotation. And that is, you are required, and this goes in all Fel-Scarred content currently, you are required to let Metamorphosis drop before you press I-Beam again. So you'll use one Abyssal Gaze, and if I go back here, you'll press the one Abyssal Gaze after meta is pressed, and that will be pressed to get out the Demon Surge from it. But after that, with this build, with Chaotic Transformation, you will not press it again right when it comes up. Now you can see here that I-Beam is going to come up about 5 seconds before meta. So what happens here is you wait for meta to fall, and I'm going to press a Consuming Fire right as this is going off, because it does 30% more damage than Aura, and then I directly go into my I-Beam window. At the same time, this happened to be just kind of nice timing, that my Demon Soul happened to drop in a place where it would collect for me, as I did need to move this fight mechanic, but I I-Beam, and it shoots close enough to me that it picks up when I move, so I have my Demon Soul buff. From here, I'm just spamming Annihilations, and you can either use Death Sweep as the final global of meta. As I mentioned, it's a slight gain, about 0.3%. However, playing global perfect in a lot of scenarios is just not functional, and I find that there's times where I will accidentally have the Death Sweep be a Blade Dance outside of the meta window, and as soon as you lose a Demon Surge, it's no longer worth doing. From here, when I have Immolation Aura come back up, I'm not going to press that because I'm waiting for the next I-Beam. So really, I'm just spamming Chaos Strike and Death Sweep. I do press one Immolation Aura late enough that it will overlap the I-Beam window, but I get a reset and I get a second reset. I watch and wait and see where my Demon Soul drops when I I-Beam. So I'm going to Immolation Aura, I I-Beam, and if I don't see where it went, typically that means it probably went forward into the spew of green coming from my character. This usually serves me well. So if I didn't see it shoot behind me, which I didn't in this case, I walk forward, and you can see I gained the buff. From there, as I press my Essence Break, I'm then just spamming Annihilation until that final global, and then I'm Death Sweeping on the final global to get as much damage out during the Essence Break window as I can. Hunt is pressed on cooldown, Death Sweep isn't pressed as I'm in an Immolation Aura window, and then we go to another intermission here. So I'm just simply going to I-Beam the ads, and get my Demon Surges out before moving. Coming into this next window, the thing that I'm looking at is I have Immolation Aura up, and I'm going into I-Beam. So, same thing is going to happen here. Aura is pressed right before I-Beam comes up, and I'm going to be pressing I-Beam. While I'm I-Beaming, I'm going to be spamming my Essence Break keybind while looking for my Demon Soul. So, I am now spamming Essence Break, and we see my Demon Soul drop on the left. So I'm going to wiggle to the left as I Essence Break, press my Annihilations, and then Death Sweep on the final GCD to get that last Demon Surge out. So, while it seems overly complex, looking at the, the rotation page and seeing this big block of text, it's actually incredibly simple. This is much more simplistic than Reavers. The only thing to it is remembering the priority of, if you have Immolation Aura and Demon Soul, you're not going to be pressing Death Sweep unless it's for that Demon Surge. As long as you're doing that, you're pretty much playing the spec right, and the main thing to look out for is then going to be that you're not missing any globals. I'll get into that in just 1 second here. Now, as I mentioned that you don't want to be missing any globals, basically the main thing about this is every single Chaos Strike and Annihilation, which is usually the globals that you end up losing when you are losing globals, is significantly more important on Fel-Scarred. Because of Burning Blades, they just do so much more damage, as well as looking at Immolation Aura and Demon Soul affecting those. So, if I come into a specific boss, and let's go look at my Fractalis, and we're going to look at the log for this. So, putting it into WoW Analyzer and pulling it up. Now, I'm not using WoW Analyzer for, any of the actual information showing in it, but what I am looking at here is going to be the timeline. You can come in here, turn off the movement. And I did Sigil of Flame pre-pull on this. It was after that I decided, let's no longer do that Sigil of Flame because it's not worth doing. I'm also not sure why it says I used 2 Immolation Auras pre-pull, because I did not. But, anyway. You're going to spam out the Immolation Auras, as I said, and when you look here, what you're going to see is that my global cooldowns are typically flowing properly well into my next ability. Now, these GCD lines usually work. With I-Beam, you can't spell queue your next ability, so it depends how fast you're spamming, as well as the fact that I do want to be picking up that Demon Soul, so the Demon Surge just gets 20% bonus damage. And then, after meta, doing the rotation, as I said. And when you come in and take a look here, you can see that the GCDs are being played nearly GCD perfect, where it's a 7 or 0.78 second GCD, and the next GCD is happening 0.78 after. Anytime that you don't have this happening, and even in my gameplay this happens often, this happens in everyone's gameplay, but minimizing this is how you maximize DPS. Towards the end of my meta here, it does get a little bit sloppy. I'm not sure exactly why. Given that it's Fractalis and that I do raid lead, it could be in regards to rotation getting messed up when I'm calling mechanics, but the only thing on this one's really calling for us to spread, and either doing the spread or maybe getting knocked if I was doing a wall break. And then, as long as you're getting those Immolation Auras before your I-Beam windows, and you're getting a Death Sweep in the window, this is all pretty much perfectly fine. So, this is all Fel-Scarred really looks like, and when it comes down to it, outside of those Metamorphosis windows, all you're pressing is an Aura every single I-Beam, and then using Annihilation until you Death Sweep at the end. Make sure you're picking up your Demon Souls. Hunt gets pressed on cooldown. You're just Chaos Striking and Blade Dancing unless you need Fury. There's nothing else going on, and it's truly that simple on single target. So, the only thing to really maximize then is make sure that you're always in a GCD as often as you can be to really maximize your damage at all times. Now that I've gone through just about everything, I do want to include one more thing. This is talking about a bugged, and while it's not specific to Fel-Scarred, it is much more prevalent on Fel-Scarred due to the fact that Metamorphosis resets Immolation Aura, as well as the fact that Consuming Fire only uses 4 of 5 Immolation Aura spell IDs. So basically, what I mean by that is, if I pull up my game here, and I pull up my weak auras, what you're going to see here is that I have 5 different buff IDs for Immolation Aura that are inside my weak auras. Now, the first ID, and these numbers don't necessarily mean anything to you, but just to show what I'm talking about, the first number is 258920, which is the original Immolation Aura ID, I believe one originally from Legion. And then there's 4 more that were made in Dragonflight during the rework where Fire Inside was added. That's 427912, 13, 14, and 15. Now, what that means is that there are only 5 Immolation Aura IDs, so you can't have more than 5 Immolation Auras up. That also means that, with the fact that you can only have 5 up, what happens if you press the 6th one? Now, to show a clip here, basically what happens when you press a 6th one is it seems to do some form of spell queuing of trying to cast the Immolation Aura, which constantly fails. If you look at this in a log, you will see hundreds of casts per second attempting to go off. However, you can press other GCDs while this is happening, but if you press Abyssal Gaze or I-Beam like I do in the clip here, it will instantly cancel anything like a channel, causing it to entirely not deal any damage and the ability to be lost. So, the thing that's important to remember about this is simply that You are limited to 5 Immolation Auras up at once, and Consuming Fire cannot use that original spell ID. What I mean by that is, if I press 2 Immolation Auras here, you're going to see that 258920 was used, as well as 427912. Now, the next one that would get pressed would be 427913, as they are used in order. However, when I meta and I press Consuming Fire, it uses 427912. It cannot use the original spell ID. So what happens here is, if you press, say, 5 Immolation Auras in a row, then you're going to be using all 5 of the IDs. However, the first one to expire will be the original ID, 258920. So if you press all 5 of these, and then you meta, and then you try to press the Consuming Fire, even if you only have these 4 up, your Consuming Fire will also fail. This is the best way I could describe this bug. The really only important thing to matter is that if you are ever under 4 Immolation Auras, you'll never have a problem with Consuming Fire, and if you're under 5 Immolation Auras, you won't have a problem with Immolation Aura. But the reason that I bring this up is that if you do press one too many, being aware that this bug exists and knowing to not press I-Beam after having done so is going to save you from a pretty significant loss in just losing that I-Beam. So, something to be aware of. It's an unfortunate issue. It's been around since this was all added in Dragonflight, and I don't really suspect it'll be fixed anytime soon. Thank you for watching. That covers everything I wanted to put into the Fel-Scarred guide. This did end up being significantly longer than I had planned on it being, and put a bit more work into it than I had planned on as well. Really, it is simpler to play overall, but there's some muscle memory you just have to break to get this build down, as well as the fact that there's only certain situations that it's better for. So, if this isn't something that you feel like playing, don't feel like it's required. It absolutely isn't. It's barely ahead of Eldrazi in single target. And if you want to learn Eldrazi Reaver and Raid, down below in the description, you will find my Raid guide for that, as well as I have Mythic Plus guides for both Eldrazi Reaver and for Fel-Scarred. If you like this kind of content, please leave a like on the video, and you can follow my channel for more like this if you want to stay up to date with Havoc Demon Hunter. You can also catch me streaming live at twitch.tv/Shadarek. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.